what we have seen here is basically a case of positive discrimination that essentially has interfered with the defence of the realm, for goodness sake. They have actively discriminated against white people, haven't they?
Well, Patrick, I don't even like using the phrase positive discrimination. I think it's such an extraordinary oxymoron. What we've seen here is behaviour which clearly falls in the territory of being anti-male, anti-white and anti-meritocracy in the Royal Air Force. And I think it's absolutely remarkable where we've had the former head of recruitment, Group Captain Lizzie Nichol, express the view that these efforts to fast-track ethnic minority and female recruits into training positions, she expressed her reservations, felt that this was a clear breach of existing equalities legislation, and yet the organisation proceeded with these initiatives. And I think that needs to be investigated itself, the kind of pressure that she was put under within the organisation. And as you say, Patrick, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that an organisation such as the Royal Air Force seems to be riddled with what we would consider to be radical identity politics.
But there's more to it as well, isn't it? Because this all really started by someone sitting around and saying, we need to set a diversity target. We need to set a diversity quota. And instead of just saying, well, let's not be actively racist when we go to try to recruit people, they apparently set themselves this ridiculously ambitious and completely unachievable diversity quota. So as far as I can tell, so that at some point in a few years' time, some of the top brass at the RAF could stand in front of a recruitment poster that looked like the United Nations had met loose women, and then they can go, look, see what work we've done. Well, then they weren't able to actually achieve that, and so then they then held back the number of white recruits as well. Having these targets to begin with is a problem, Rakib, is it not?
No, absolutely. I have no time for quotas like this. I've actually often said that when it comes to racial quotas, it serves to undermine the authority of genuinely talented and high ability ethnic minority Brits. Now, some people say that these targets are ambitious. I'd consider them to be incredibly reckless. Yeah. Now, I do know that the RAF has dismissed suggestions that this led to a lowering of standards, but equally, it doesn't seem like that a strong and high levels of standard setting have been the order of the day in recent times. Rather, what seems to be the case is that they've been looking to hit particular thresholds when it comes to fast-tracking members of ethnic minorities and women into training roles, and that has led to discrimination towards white male candidates.
Well, let's just look at why. Why do this? Because I find it baffling that this idea of diversity and ethnic and gender inclusion has infected every single aspect of society, right up until and including our Royal Air Force and other elements of our military. Why is it deemed to be more important than anything else to be able to say, have you seen how diverse we are?
No, I'd almost go as far as saying that it's diversity, equality and inclusion, that there's a DEI religion which is now taken hold in quite, sensitive, security-oriented institutions, which many people at home listening to this would find absolutely remarkable, also find it deeply worrying. Ultimately, I think the emphasis needs to be on talent, knowledge, and capability. But it seems like those, some people think that those kind of concepts are old-fashioned now, and instead we need to follow this. But I think what you run the risk of doing is fundamentally lowering standards in organisations which are responsible for our defence and security, and many people find that deeply troubling. Patrick.
Well, I think I find it unacceptable, and also as well, describing some applicants as useless white men, useless white pilots. I mean, look, I don't know whether or not they were useless, in which case, I suppose, fine, but I'd hope not. But what's their race got to do with any of it as well? I find that bizarre. That, again, appears to be this notion, Rakib, that you can't be racist against white people. But I think that probably is a bit racist, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I've made the point, the Equality Act, race, for example, is a protected characteristic. That includes every single racial background that does live in the UK. I think all too often people look at equalities legislation, they think that this only applies when it comes to protecting so-called oppressed minorities. But here's a case, Patrick, that these initiatives, which was supposedly about promoting diversity and bolstering inclusion of the RAF, discriminated towards white men, quite often in older sections, including members of the older section of the population. You talk about that case there where a member of the RAF, an experienced member, was resisting radical transgenderism and paid the price for that. And I think that these kind of cultural trends are deeply worrying, especially if they're taking place within organisations such as the Royal Air Force, Patrick.
Yeah, absolutely. Just what you were alluding to there is actually, a colonel in the army, I believe, who basically said that he essentially thought that there were just two genders, and supposedly, anyway, there was some kind of investigation into this, and he's led a team of 60 troops in 306 hospital support regiment, alongside working as an NHS intensive care consultant, 2 tours of Afghanistan. He says he felt forced to retire 6 years earlier than planned, slashing his total army pension in the process, because he was facing, a backlash for saying that women are women and men are men. I mean, what's that got to do with anything? I mean, realistically, it's just absolutely ridiculous. 14 years of unblemished service, poof, gone up in a puff of smoke because he thinks that someone with a penis can't be a woman. But Rakib, thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure. Great stuff. Rakib Hassan there, social policy analyst. Now, I believe I have a statement here, which is the RAF's apology. It says, we now know... I think we might be missing the top of this one here now, but basically the RAF were forced to apologise essentially over this. It says, we now know that it did not. I apologise unreservedly to all those affected. It was added that the RAF accepts that some men were discriminated against. The group of 31 individuals who likely missed the opportunity to qualify for a £5,000 joining bonus, a golden handshake, if you will, are said to have been identified. They have been offered the award. But again, it makes you think, doesn't it? It just makes you think. If this is happening at the RAF, this is happening in our military, this is happening everywhere. And it has already become acceptable, socially acceptable, if not legal, but socially acceptable to discriminate against white men. That is just a thing that is happening.